everyone, welcome back to episode 10 of Interview with Scientists series. Our guest for today is Dr. Chris. Chris graduated with a PhD in Religious Studies from the University of Toronto. He ran policy projects post his PhD and then for the Canadian federal government as a policy analyst. He is the founder of Roostervane, which aims to build career post-PhD. Today we will talk with Chris about his work, Roostervane, and alternative careers for PhD. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Pleasure as well. Can you tell us about your PhD work? It's really different from what I talk to people about STEM fields, but religious work is really different. So,
yeah, it's different. To be honest, I haven't really talked or thought about it much in the last couple of years, other than an interview I did a couple of weeks ago, because I just did other things. But yeah, so my PhD was I was in a religious studies department,
okay.
And the study of religion. It should be kind of noted that a lot of people hear religion and they think that it's dealing with going to be like, studying to be a priest or an imam or something, or like some kind of religious practice. But
Yes.
the discipline of religious studies, the academic discipline, is actually kind of social scientific, some humanities kind of. It's an approach to studying religion as a human phenomena, whatever that looks like. So my work was in kind of at the intersection of diaspora theory and religion. So I was really interested in, like, when people move to a new place, how do kind of like religion and even like ethnicity, like how do those things kind of intertwine, and how do people use religion to create a new, like, not a new identity, but diaspora identities in new spaces. And also kind of the theoretical stuff was because religion and diaspora are both two kind of, this is my kind of humanities side coming out, but they're both kind of ideological constructs. How do you actually study religion and diaspora as two different constructs that both are very loaded with expectations and meaning? So that was kind of the theoretical side, but I believe it or not, I was actually an ancient historian. So most of my work, other than the theory, which was just kind of it was modern theory, but a lot of my work was in ancient sources. So I studied one of my case studies I did was Christians in Corinth, looking at how Christianity moved into Corinth. Presumably with some connection to a Jewish diaspora there, maybe. But then I looked at other religions too, and I had 4 different case studies looking at how, in antiquity, when immigrants moved to a new place, how religion was used to kind of negotiate their relationship to the outside. And eventually, the thing that I was really interested in is at what point so I had a few different examples where groups started as like an ethnic group, but over time they shifted, and we might call them like a religious group, because it was people with all different ethnicities who were just joined together by common worship. So that was that in a nutshell. That's what I studied and wrote on.
That sounds really interesting. It's really different from what STEM field or science people do. So that's something different that I heard today.
It's funny because when I we tweet and talk about PhDs in academia, there are a lot of similarities, obviously, in what we experience, but when you actually get to the nuts and bolts of what we study, there are a lot of differences.
Yes, definitely. So when you were a graduate student, what did you want to do after your PhD? Like when you entered your first year of PhD?
Yes, undeniably, I wanted to be a professor, which is the reason for so much of the work I do now. I do have people say to me, I don't want to be a professor, I'm just doing a PhD, I want to work outside. And I never really thought it was possible. It hadn't even occurred to me that you could work outside of academia with a PhD. And I wasn't, I sort of blame myself for this. There are other people I could blame, but I blame myself for not looking realistically at what I could actually do with this degree. Because I just didn't pay attention. And when people said, oh, you should go do a PhD and you can be a professor, that sounded great. I wanted to be a professor. Sounded like a good life. And I saw my professors, and they were jetting off to international conferences and publishing research papers, and they hung out in old offices and old buildings that looked kind of aesthetically pleasing. So I thought, that seems like a good life. I think I could do that. So definitely wanted to be a professor.
And that's a thought of many people, including me. When I started my grad school, not even grad school, when I did my masters, I always wanted to become a professor. My parents always asked me, "So, what do you want to do after your masters or PhD?" And I was like, "Oh, I want to go for aiming for a professorship at some
Yeah.
reputable university." That's something that most of us who are in STEM fields or any other fields
Yeah.
look
It's very
forward to.
common.
It's very common.
Yeah.
But when you started looking for alternative careers, what were some resources that was useful for you?
When I started looking for
Alternative,
non-academic opportunities, or
yes.
there, I don't remember there being much. Now, part of that, I think part of it should be placed on me too, that I don't think I looked hard enough. My department just didn't really talk. I shouldn't say they didn't ever talk about non-academic jobs. I think there were one or two seminars that were kind of jobs outside of academia, and I did sit through them.
Okay.
But even when you have those kind of resources, when the whole attitude of everybody in the department is academia or nothing, and we didn't even talk about people who had left to do other things. We only talked about people who, had somehow stayed within the academic construct, whether that was a postdoc or a visiting professorship or a tenure track professorship, and there weren't many of those by the time I got there. So in terms of resources, I do remember reading Jen Polk's blog, and I had probably come across some of the other kind of people too. I read Karen Kelsey's book early on, and I initially had read that to prepare for the academic job market, but it actually had some really useful stuff kind of at the end. If I remember correctly, it's the last chapter, maybe even two, about non-academic work and entrepreneurship. And I found that really helpful and interesting too, that she had actually thought about that.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that and hearing her story of trying to, before she started her current business, she was doing, I think she was selling like flowers or something. I probably have the details wrong, but she was doing some sort of entrepreneurship thing.
Okay.
And I actually read that and thought, that sounds really cool. Like, that doesn't sound like anything I would turn my nose up at. It sounds kind of like an exciting neat adventure, So all that to say, I didn't really prepare much. I didn't really have much awareness of resources that were there.
Yeah.
I know a lot more now, ironically, but when I started Roostervane, I hadn't heard it very much. So.
Okay. So what exactly is Roostervane?
Well, Roostervane, I guess, it started out as a personal blog.
Okay.
I had been working outside of academia for a while, and essentially I figured out how to leave academia just by networking and figuring it out, and I moved to a new city, Ottawa, capital city of Canada, and I just kind of stumbled my way into a career through a combination of really just putting myself out there and trying to talk to everybody and walking into places and having receptionists say, "No, thanks, we're not hiring." And I really just tried everything. Anyways, and I eventually landed in public policy, and I eventually came to see that PhDs were doing really fantastic work out of the academy, but nobody that I could see was really talking about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the blog started. I did a seminar at my department on non-academic jobs for PhDs. At that point, I was just like in between finishing my PhD and waiting to defend.
Okay.
So the seminar was really well received by my fellow students, and they asked if somebody said you should put up a blog because there are a lot of people who want this information. So I love to blog because I'd had other blogs over the years, nothing really successful, but I just enjoyed it. So I went home, and I think over the next few weeks at some point, I put up a blog post on a Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
Called something like "Why I Don't Regret Leaving Academia."
Yeah.
And it took months before anybody saw it, but eventually it got some traction on Academic Chatter, and a lot of people were messaging me and saying, like, "I wish we'd known this."
Yeah.
And they asked questions, and that kind of led to more blog posts. And like, what do I do? What other jobs can you get with a humanities PhD or whatever? So I kept blogging and growing. So it was a blog at first. I guess I'm calling it more and more of a website these days, and we're always like the only thing I really want to do is just help people know how to build great careers.
Yeah.
But there's so much need. I'm always trying to figure out how to best do that. So I've experimented with different things. I wrote a book.
Yeah.
But even right now, we're about to launch a bunch of courses on the Roostervane platform. So like in addition to the blog, there will be courses people can do and things like that for hopefully reasonable fee. And we're also exploring right now, we're starting to work with universities to provide those courses to universities as well. So when you ask what is Roostervane, that's a super long answer, but when you ask what it is, it's always kind of evolving, but really, I don't have a fixed destination in my head of where it's going. It's really just like, how can we be the resource that I wish I'd had during my PhD, and how can we help that person who's lost to build something great, whatever it is. It might be getting a career, it might be being an entrepreneur, or a public speaker, or whatever, like whatever that looks like, whatever success looks like for the individual reading it who has a degree and feels like they can't do anything with it. That's what we just want to help them do.
Is. Okay, that's a super sweet answer. So, so from a blog post to a website, how has your journey been?
The online journey, you mean?
Yep.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun, but I'm a nerd. I mean, I'm really a digital marketing nerd. So the part of what I do that nobody really sees is actually the stuff that I'm probably the best at, which is I'm good at like we call it SEO, search engine optimization, and different digital marketing tactics, and I love it. Like I'm such a nerd. I drill down on like building. I won't talk too much about it, but I drill down on that stuff, and I'm always looking at my analytics and looking at my seeing how I can do better and what worked and how can I grow it.
Yes.
And so that to me, I mean, I think as I said, I'd been blogging. I've been studying digital marketing for like 10 years.
Okay.
Fascinated by the ideas, but never had anything to actually do it with. So now Roostervane is kind of also my digital marketing experiment. So. Yeah, so it's fun. I mean, I'm always experimenting, and with platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever, experimenting with that, seeing like my on-site SEO, like what builds it, what works, and it's just a lot of fun.
That's
it's a
great.
hobby.
Yeah. So as we're talking about digital marketing, I have one question for you. Where do you get the most traction from? Because for the Addictive Brain, Instagram is the best platform to get the traction from, but it differs for people. So.
It depends. Yeah, it depends on what your goals are for sure. Because my personal goals, because I have the website, I'm trying to filter everything I do through the website. So my main goal is to drive traffic to the website.
Yeah.
So for me, Instagram actually isn't that great because Instagram isn't really great as a traffic driver. It's good to build a following in and of itself, but it's really hard because you can't link out.
Yes.
It's hard to say like, here, read this post, and then you can't click and go to it, right? So I haven't actually put a lot of work into Instagram. Twitter, no surprise, Twitter has been big for me.
Okay.
It was ever since the blog started taking off on Academic Chat or Academic Twitter. A lot of traffic comes from there, and I mean, it's not. I've had days where I get 4,000 or 5,000 readers a day from Twitter. So it is often big. It's not that all the time, but I have had those days. And then. So LinkedIn, I've been experimenting more and more with LinkedIn.
Okay.
It's been so. LinkedIn is a little tricky because the algorithm tends to punish people who try to take people off the site. So you kind of have to do workarounds. So I've been playing around with republishing posts in the article section of LinkedIn, and then have like a link to keep reading to my website. I'm always playing around with that. But LinkedIn is still much smaller than Twitter. And then I'm always, so I've experimented with Pinterest a lot, which it hasn't actually been that great, but there are a lot of bloggers that swear by it.
Okay.
So I haven't really cracked the Pinterest code yet. I don't know if it's just because my niche is not really, like maybe people would rather see like home and gardening and cooking stuff on Pinterest than careers. I don't know. So I'm still figuring that out. This is again, a really long answer. But YouTube has been really great lately. So I've been trying to work more and more on my YouTube channel. But the great thing about YouTube, unlike other social media platforms, with maybe the exception of Pinterest, is YouTube is very searchable. That works like a Google SEO, and obviously it actually is the Google because it's owned by Google. So when you get traffic from YouTube, I will often have videos with links back to the blog, and I'm starting to get traffic from YouTube now too, from people who found stuff on YouTube and go back to the blog. So all of those are all social media traffic. Yes. Again, I haven't answered.
Yeah. Really long. That really helps.
I'm long-winded. But as I said, I mean, right from the beginning, I built an SEO, and the SEO, if I look at my SEO, it's just like through the roof. So relative to where I was a year ago. So over the course of a year, I'd say my SEO probably grows probably about 40 to 50% month over month right now. It's growing SEO traffic. So I'm close to about half of my traffic to the blog being from SEO, and I think in the long term I would like it to be, like, I don't know, maybe more than 3/4 just SEO, because it's just, that's sustainable traffic. That's people finding your stuff every day, regardless of what you actually do. So it's really, that's really my vision for it.
That's a great achievement. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
So coming back to alternative careers, what are some of the alternative careers available for humanities and science students or PhDs?
When I came to Ottawa, I was kind of immersed in this knowledge economy pretty quickly. And I had the privilege right away, or in a pretty short period of time, meeting people who had done advanced degrees in the humanities and or social sciences. And I found that a lot of them were doing really well in a knowledge economy city. The kind of combination of like high level critical thinking skills, high level reading, writing, research, all those types of things, mixed with, if you have them, and not everybody does, but like mixed with really solid people skills, really made for, like, if you have that combination in a city like Ottawa or Washington, you can make just about anything happen. Like it really is a killer combination, and a lot of humanities do have that skill set. So what I stumbled into, my first job was working for a think tank, and essentially I was running these big policy research projects. When I did a lot of stuff around Indigenous Reconciliation, which in Canada, for those of your watchers from outside of Canada, Canada has a pretty horrendous record of dealing with Indigenous people. So we're trying to do better with varying levels of success. But in any case, a lot of the projects I ran were about Indigenous reconciliation, mostly like from an economic front, like how to empower. The one big one I did was on empowering Inuit, economic empowerment for like Inuit, who are the people who live across the Arctic in Canada's north. And then so that was kind of program management stuff, but I also saw a lot of policy stuff. I jumped into the government, and I was working for a program that taught other countries how to build refugee programs. So essentially it was a lot more policy based, and I was working a lot more in the mechanisms of the federal government.
I see.
So learning how to brief people and write policy alternatives and kind of research into an area and become an expert in it and grow it. And that's what, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been working primarily in like refugee stuff in addition to my work at Roostervane. So I'd say that's kind of background, but like within that, there's public policy, like policy careers are great. Program, any kind of like program stuff, program management. I think like lobbying is actually a really great career for humanities PhDs, believe it or not, because there's a lot of knowledge required, but also like those people skills, writing skills, persuasive skills. So I like lobbying, like communications is huge, public relations. There are just so many places where these kind of skills come in handy. And I was reading this report last week. It was US based. I forget who it was from. Maybe it was from the Academy of Arts and Sciences or something. That it was about how humanities students just don't catch up. And it was really depressing to me, and seeing like how much humanities students are getting paid. And I was really, because a lot of these careers are really high income careers and really high impact. So it's kind of an aside, but I really would like to see the narrative around humanities careers changing, because I think most humanities are thinking of like alternative academic careers. Most humanities students are thinking like, I can be a librarian or I can be admin in a university. And it's actually a lot more rich than that, and there are a lot better options. So,
of course.
Better is relative. I mean, it's subjective. If you want to be admin in the university, go do that. But there are a lot of really great options either way.
Of course. And they need to find those alternative options. So how can we approach these alternative careers? What should be our approach be? Networking is one of the key aspects, I know. But apart from that.
Apart from networking, oh man, that's all I was going to say was networking.
Okay, then we can talk about networking as well.
No, I mean, it's like people can try. It's tough to... Like if all you've ever done is, if you did an English PhD or something and you wrote about Chaucer, it's hard to make the case to an employer that you have a lot to offer. You can, so you can, if you're creating a resume or LinkedIn profile, it's not to say you can't optimize that to the greatest extent you possibly can to increase your chances of getting in. But anecdotally, a lot of people I know get hired through networking.
Yes.
It's not possible everywhere. I know, like, a lot of the people I know who work in tech, some of the big tech companies, you can't really network your way in anymore, apparently, so I'm told. But for a lot of companies, it's a great way to, not necessarily that you're just going to get offered a job because you network, but I think through networking, you can learn about your industry. So that's what, I mean, rather than just networking to get a job,
Yes.
one of the first things I would say is you network to learn. And essentially, until you sit down with somebody who, does public policy and will explain to you we have to write a policy brief and we have to write, these are the types of things we do and these are the types of relationships we manage. And until you actually hear somebody talk about it and understand it and start to write down that keyword and go look it up or whatever, it's really hard to make the case to somebody that you can just transition into that. But once you learn more about that field, you'll start to kind of match and say, or go read some policy reports. Go read, you can literally Google policy reports from any organization under the sun. There are thousands of them being released all the time. Many of them are bad. So there's a great opportunity for people who have good research skills, good writing skills. But you just need to kind of learn to speak the language. I was interviewing Chris Katerine about his book, about leaving academia. And it was one of the things that really came through in his book, and I think is really a good way to explain it. It's almost like speaking a different language. You just need to learn to kind of inhabit that new space. And if all you've ever been in is academia, you've been socialized to speak academic. So it's time to learn a new language.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think networking, for that reason, for career exploration, is huge. But inevitably, networking often becomes, when you're talking to somebody, they'll often say I know somebody who might be looking for somebody, over here to do this thing. So it does open up opportunities as well. If you're applying so one other thing I would give, because you asked for other than networking, I've been using LinkedIn a lot. I think LinkedIn is really powerful. And one thing you can do with LinkedIn is you can actually go to a job posting. I just did an example of this the other day for a LinkedIn course I'm working on. But go pick a job posting that's really exciting to you. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's I think the one I was using as an example for this course was a high-level content writer for a tech company in Silicon Valley. Go pick a job and sit down and read it really carefully and highlight keywords. You can print it out and highlight keywords and start to work some of those keywords into your LinkedIn profile. Not because you're going to go get that job necessarily, but because once I'm looking for these types of jobs, I'm looking for jobs in communications, start to pay attention to the types of language that gets used and start to work that into your LinkedIn profile, your resume, start to try to match this person wants an internal communication strategy. Is there anything I've done that actually kind of fits with that? And you could look and say I did some kind of interdepartmental thing or whatever, and maybe that fits, So I think some of that, LinkedIn really makes that work a lot easier to do that mapping. You don't need to use LinkedIn, but it's powerful. And then as you work that stuff into your profile and as you kind of position yourself as somebody who's moving into, say, communications roles, you're going to get more and more people are looking at you as a communications person rather than an academic. So I think that's another really good strategy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that strategy. So what if a person has 2 or 3 different career choices in his mind? For example, project management, communication, and public relations. So all 3 are different fields. So
kind of 2 things. I mean, they are all different, but they're all related. So there could be a lot of, within communications, there might be a lot of project management. Within public relations, there's almost definitely communications. So they're not mutually exclusive. So I think you might want to, if you're doing the LinkedIn thing I just talked about, you can position yourself as being a communications expert, but still be looking for jobs in public relations. So I think if you're interested in working in geology on the one hand and early childhood education on the other hand, that's a little more of a difficult spread. So you probably have to pick one and kind of chase one, at least in terms of your LinkedIn and your public facing stuff. And then if you're applying for jobs in both, you'd probably have 2 different resumes. But it's not impossible, but I'd kind of pick the jobs that excite you and that seem even a little bit aspirational. I like to tell people to look at jobs that you might, even if you don't have the experience now, try to set yourself up for a job that you might get in 3 or 4 years, and start to position yourself as somebody who's going to be good enough, or maybe who already is good enough to do that job. and people will start to realize that you look like a person who could do that job, right?
Yeah.
And then you might just say, okay, well, I just need some, experience in X, Y, or Z. So.
Yeah. So how can the education system let students know about alternative careers? Because most of the universities don't do that kind of educational promotion. They don't expand the careers. They just say, okay, like they don't tell about alternative careers.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and I do know. I mean, a lot of universities are having this conversation,
Yes.
Especially because of the pandemic, and with the kind of collapse. I mean, the academic job market was already bad, but with the pandemic, that we especially saw a collapse, and a collapse of some programs as well, who are not bringing in new PhD applicants in the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a tough call. Like universities. In my opinion, universities do have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Universities haven't traditionally done a lot of thinking of how to support PhD careers.
Yes.
And a lot of university career centers are fantastic,
Yeah.
but they're not always set up for advanced degrees. They're often more dedicated to undergraduates.
Yes.
And some of this stuff works. So a resume might be a resume, whether you're an undergraduate or a PhD.
Yeah.
But I don't know that a lot of career centers are set up to support PhDs. So I am seeing some, you're seeing offices like people like graduate professional development people being hired in universities, or graduate, student success people at a graduate level or whatever. So there are more and more. I think universities are kind of waking up to it a little bit, but I would definitely like to see a lot more funding for graduate career development.
Yes.
And it's one of the reasons why I was looking at what we could do with Roostervane, and I thought, well, we can create these courses because I actually know this stuff. And the other thing is, I think, just as an aside, I think it's helpful to have, one of the reasons I love the online space and what we can do online is because it's helpful to have people who have actually worked. Like, I've actually worked in policy. I've actually worked at a think tank. Actually, like, I know what that's like day to day. And there are a lot of people like that. I mean, when you look around, and especially a lot of us are active on Twitter because it's a lot of PhDs who have left the academy want to contribute to the conversation still. So I think starting to bring more and more of that knowledge back to the academy is important. Like, it's not enough to just kind of sit and sit in the academy and look outward and try to guess what you can do with a PhD. Like, why not bring in 5 PhDs who are working outside of academia, not just for like a special guest speaker thing, which is fine too, but to do program review and to say, like, how could we have supported you throughout your PhD to make sure that you would have had a better chance of getting some of these jobs that you eventually did get, So, I mean, the knowledge is there. There just needs to be a better conversation. And then the other thing I think, again, it's kind of growing, but I think we need to have better conversations between industry and academia.
Yeah.
I know, like, Germany does really well at this. Canada, we do have the, what's it called? The Business Higher Education Roundtable. MyTax is a good program too. So there is like a nascent conversation happening, but I think around the world, whatever country you're listening from, there's, as far as I can tell, there's a lot of potential for these kinds of conversations, but it requires us. I mean, sciences are a little better. They do a little better. And a lot of sciences, STEM is often a little better connected to industry anyways. And I think it can be a little easier transition. There are still a lot of challenges STEM students face too.
Yes.
But in the social sciences and humanities, I mean, often people just aren't talking about it. So there's a lot of work we could do there.
Okay.
In having these conversations with organizations that aren't academia.
Yeah.
But that also requires, especially for my humanities people, getting off their high horse about academia is the only thing that's worth doing, and go and look at all the wonderful things that the grads are doing. So that's a bit of an attitude shift that needs to happen too.
Okay. Do you miss being in academia?
I don't really know. There's not. It's funny. Like I'm actually working. I'm working a policy contract right now, so I'm doing some policy work.
Yep.
And like literally this morning, I sat reading research and writing a paper. Like, it doesn't actually feel all that different. Which is essentially, I mean, my PhD too. I worked remotely for most of it, so it hasn't really fundamentally changed that much in many cases when I'm doing the policy work. It feels like when I worked for the government. It feels very similar to a lot of what I did in academia. So I think that's a surprise a lot of PhDs have too, is that fundamentally this type of work is not unique to academia. So, I mean, that's the one thing. I barely even feel like it's changed that much. I'm still doing all the same kinds of work. But in terms of the actual work itself, there's no way I miss it. No way.
Okay.
I'm having so much more fun.
Definitely.
I'm having so much more fun outside. I've loved building a business, building a website. I have loved, like, the policy work I've done has been so impactful. I've had the opportunity to work with, like, the United Nations and with other countries, and helping develop refugee programs and helping have input into actually, you know, things that save people's lives. And create opportunities for refugees. And I mean, if I was a professor, I would just be like talking about old stuff that happened a long time ago, which there's nothing wrong with if you're a professor watching this. But for me personally, I've been so much more fulfilled in my non-academic career than I ever could have been in an academic career. And that's one of the reasons I've talked about it so much, because it's just exciting and the options are endless.
Of course.
And I don't know, I'm having way more fun outside.
Okay,
you know,
that's good to know.
Somebody watching inevitably is gonna say, well, I miss academia and I left and I want to go back, or, you know, like, you never know, everybody's story is unique. But for me personally, I don't miss it.
Okay. And what do you like the most outside of working at Roostervane or as a public policy analyst? What are your hobbies?
What are my hobbies? Well, I already said social media marketing is a hobby, but I play music. I'm a musician, so I do some. I like to play. I used to play drums and all these instruments, but all I have left is an acoustic guitar. So I like to kind of sit and play my guitar. I like to do. I like to work out. I had a lot more hobbies before I had kids. I used to do rock climbing and play hockey and woodworking and all sorts of cool stuff, but. Yeah, now that I have kids, my hobbies are pretty much like watching the kids at the park or taking them sliding or something. So it's changed a lot.
Of course, changes for good.
Changes for good. And you know what? I'll show that. So I've never learned how to do a Rubik's Cube in my life. And my daughter wanted to do one. My daughter is really, she calls herself a scientist. She's super awesome. My oldest. And she's always thinking sciencey. She's got like experiments going on in her bedroom that kind of smell funky. And you'll come in and there's like a container of some rotten food or something. And she wanted to see which one, you know, one had vinegar and one didn't. What was the difference with the decomposition or whatever? So she's got a really inquiring mind. And one of the things she wanted was this Rubik's Cube. So she brought it home, and I've been sitting with it for like the last day or two trying to figure out how to solve a Rubik's Cube. So I can get the white side, but I can't get the rest. I'm learning the algorithm. So.
Good luck with that. That's a difficult task.
Thank you. That's isn't that an exciting life, an exciting hobby? I'm sitting solving a Rubik's Cube. That's how wild my life is. We are in a pandemic too, so my options are limited.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for joining us today and sharing your thoughts about alternative careers.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.